我的房终于断供了，房子也要被查封了。我是19年买的房子，当时首付付了42万，然后每个月要还6000多块钱。去年夏天的生意不好，资金链断了，但是我才发现这3年月供一共还了21万，本金才还了4万多，剩下的都是利息。法院又给我起诉了，现在不光房子被查封了，银行卡都给我冻结了。
降价1000万卖不出去，5亿深圳的楼市真的是惨不忍睹。香蜜湖的顶级公寓最高优惠1012万，整个深圳从里到外到处都是打折房，很多人买房的发财梦可能要暂停了。人才公寓房多了9000多套，法拍房、断供房着急出手打骨折价的不计其数。新商品房真的很难卖，200万的人才房和500万的商品房几乎一模一样。我现在反而羡慕那些租房的，3000块钱一个月，住的不舒服随时换。
The May Day Golden Week used to be one of the peak seasons for real estate sales in China. However, this year's May Day holiday saw extremely quiet sales in property sales offices and second-hand housing transaction venues, with very few transactions taking place. Even first-tier cities like Beijing and Shanghai were no exception. For example, Beijing's newly signed contracts for commercial residential properties were only 114 units, with a transaction area of only 14,000 square meters. This represents a decrease of over 60% compared to the same period last year, when Beijing was almost under lockdown due to the pandemic. The market conditions are poor, and developers in urgent need of capital have to find ways to promote sales, with price reduction being the most effective method. However, under the rule of the CCP, it is not solely up to the real estate companies to decide on price reductions. Recently, a major news story emerged in the Chinese real estate industry. 2 property projects in Kunshan City, Jiangsu Province, significantly reduced prices by 30% during the May Day period. As a result, the developers were fined heavily by the local Housing and Construction Bureau, and their online signing business was suspended. The real estate companies were required to rectify their actions, which also meant they were not allowed to engage in selling activities for a while. The explanation given by the Housing and Construction Bureau was that unauthorized price reductions disrupt the market and make it difficult to sell neighboring properties. Such unauthorized price reductions are considered dishonest and lack integrity, and have been officially documented as a misconduct in the annual integrity file. The punishment imposed on real estate companies for selling at reduced prices has sparked a heated discussion among netizens. Some commented, "We have always believed that high housing prices were the result of greed of real estate companies. Sorry, we have wronged you." Others said, "Now the mortgage slaves finally know who is really disrupting the market and who is the true driving force behind high housing prices." After a brief period of prosperity in March, China's real estate market experienced a sharp decline in April. Real estate data for April showed that among the 30 key cities nationwide, except for Beijing, Shenzhen, and Chengdu, over half of the new housing floor area sold decreased by more than 30% compared to previous months. Shanghai and Guangzhou saw a decrease of 17% and 25% respectively, while the decline was even greater in second and third-tier cities. 8 cities, including Qingdao, Dalian, Wuhan, and Changchun, saw a decrease of nearly 50%, and Xuzhou experienced a staggering decline of 77%.
你们知道4月楼市有多惨吗？4月新建商品房住宅成交7487套，一直比3月下跌了49%，直接对半腰斩的。同比22年4月下降了23%，21年4月下跌了65%。
Second-hand housing market is even bleaker. On May 12th, sharp decline in second-hand housing transactions in Shanghai and Beijing trended on the hot search list. According to the latest data, Beijing recorded only 13,928 second-hand residential property signings in April, a 37.3% decrease compared to March's 22,192 signings. The volume of second-hand housing transactions in Shanghai dropped to 17,000 units, a month-on-month decrease of 26.71%. In Guangzhou, there were only 10,500 second-hand housing transactions, a 14% decrease. In Shenzhen, the city as a whole saw only 3,192 second-hand residential property transfers in April, a 19% decline compared to March. In second- and third-tier cities, Hangzhou recorded 7,635 second-hand housing transactions in April, a nearly 30% decrease compared to the transaction volume that exceeded 10,000 units in March. The largest decline was seen in Hefei, Anhui Province, with only 2,127 second-hand housing transactions in April, which is a sharp drop of 40% compared to the high of 3,532 units in February. In contrast, the number of second-hand housing listings continued to rise. The news that second-hand housing listings in Shanghai surpassed 400,000 units spread in various WeChat real estate groups. According to investigations by mainland media, this data refers to the number of verification codes for second-hand housing. A single property may be listed on multiple platforms, resulting in multiple verification codes. If duplicate factors are excluded, the number of second-hand housing listings in Shanghai is roughly around 200,000 units. However, data shows that the number of second-hand housing listings in Shanghai has been decreasing at a rate of 13,000 units per week for the past 2 months. The remaining 3 first-tier cities, Guangzhou, Beijing, and Shenzhen, have also seen a sharp increase in second-hand housing listings. This number has surged in Guangzhou from 100,000 units last year to the current 140,000. The situation in Beijing is also not optimistic, with second-hand housing listings skyrocketing from 95,000 units to 116,800 units in just 2 months, an increase of 23%. In Shenzhen, the growth rate of listings is even more astonishing, jumping from 30,000 units at the beginning of the year to 51,400 units now, an increase of 71% in just 4 months. Such growth has far exceeded expectations. In strong second-tier cities like Nanjing and Suzhou, the situation is no better. In just 1 month, the number of second-hand housing listings in Nanjing surged by 22.62%. In Suzhou, the year-on-year increase reached an astonishing 500%. In fact, regardless of the city, the rapid surge in the number of second-hand housing listings is constantly pushing the limits of speculation. Once this trend continues, it will inevitably lead to increased difficulty in selling second-hand homes, longer transaction cycles, and a growing number of unsold properties. In order for homeowners to sell their houses, they have no choice but to continuously lower the price, which will no doubt result in a sharp decline in property market prices. In the video, the young man mentions that his friend bought a house in Taicang, Fuzhou Province, for 1.6 million yuan in 2018. And now, even after reducing the price by 500,000 yuan, he still cannot sell it. This indicates the severity of the current decline in housing prices in the market.
我有个同学2018年在台江买了一套房子，总价值160万，首付50万，贷款110万，每个月的月供是6000多块钱。房子不够住了，所以最近他打算把这个房子卖掉。现在这个房子最多只能卖120万，直接亏了40万，再加上什么办证啊、交税啊，再加上利息等等，就直接亏了50万。
The price decline in Beijing's Yanjiao is particularly alarming, with some areas experiencing a drop of up to 71%. Despite this, there are still no takers.
北京燕郊跌麻了，暴跌71%，还无人接盘。北京燕郊2016年的时候最高4万一平，如今大厂从3.5万跌到了1.3万，固安从2.8万跌到了1.2万，香河从2.4万跌到了8500，涿州从1.8万跌到了8500，跌幅最大的莫过于永清，从2.3万直接跌到了6700，跌幅高达71%，炒房客直接欲哭无泪。
At the same time, due to the impact of pandemic lockdowns, industry regulations, and geopolitical factors, the Chinese economy is in a downturn, leading to many companies closing down or laying off employees, resulting in a wave of unemployment. This has also led many people unable to continue repaying their mortgages, forcing them to sell their existing properties. However, even with significant price reductions, it is still difficult to sell houses, making it even more challenging for those already burdened with debt.
我给他们报价的话是报了250万，他居然给我对半砍了，总价273万买来的，还供了快3年了。按他这个价格要跟我成交的话，我不得亏到裤裆去了。
Since the relaxation of pandemic restrictions, banks have accelerated their litigation processes, resulting in a significant increase in the number of foreclosed properties. According to industry insiders, the number of foreclosed properties in China may exceed 10 million this year.
你知道广州有多少的家庭因为还不起房贷而断供吗？广州截止到今年的3月份，超过2万套的法拍房等着被拍卖。3月份单月放拍呢就有432套。这些人基本上分这么几种，一种呢是那些炒房的，把买房当成做生意，一门心思啊想投机赚钱的，亏了能砍就砍，砍不动我就便宜卖。第二种呢，那就是高估了自己的赚钱能力，拆东墙补西墙，最后把自己的房子给搞没了。还有2种情况呢，完全是自己住的，但是家庭出了什么大事，或者是被一些不良的开发商给坑了，完全看不到希望，最后不得不断供。
Recently, there have been numerous videos online showing home buyers being forced to default on their mortgages, resulting in extremely dire situations. According to media reports, the number of foreclosed properties put up for auction in China in 2022 surged to 606,000 households, an increase of 35.7% compared to 2021, reaching a historical high. As a result, the scale of foreclosures had risen to 1.4 trillion yuan, approximately $200 billion. The phenomenon of mortgage defaults in China differs from that of the United States. In the US, there are personal bankruptcy laws, and mortgage loan contracts stipulate that if an individual chooses to declare bankruptcy or default, they can simply surrender the property to the bank, and their personal housing debt is then terminated, albeit leaving a negative credit record for defaulting. However, if Chinese residents choose to default, not only can the bank reclaim the property, but the individual remains responsible for repaying the entire outstanding debt until it is fully cleared. They not only lose their housing, but also forfeit the down payment and previous installation payments, while carrying a heavy burden of debt. Furthermore, they may be recorded for credit default. In other words, despite both cases involving default, American homebuyers do not experience the same level of hardship as Chinese homebuyers because the United States follows a non-recourse mortgage system, where both the bank and the homebuyer share the risk of the mortgage. In China, however, mortgages are recourse loans, and individuals are not eligible for filing bankruptcy. Therefore, in China, all the risks associated with being unable to repay the loan fall entirely on the ordinary homebuyers. Consequently, unless absolutely necessary, Chinese residents are unlikely to choose defaulting due to the significant consequences involved. When homebuyers are unable to continue paying their mortgages, the only option left is to sell at a reduced price. This is one of the reasons why there has been a significant increase in the number of second-hand housing listings and a continuous decline in prices. In addition, on April 25th, the Chinese government announced the full implementation of unified real estate registration. It is rumored that this move is in preparation for the implementation of property taxes. Some believe that the nationwide networking of real estate registration and information will prompt property speculators and corrupt officials who own multiple properties to sell them in order to avoid scrutiny and the imposition of property taxes. As a result, the housing supply in the market increases, leading to a decline in property prices. Furthermore, even before the implementation of property taxes, a landlord tax has been introduced. Landlords are required to pay income tax based on 10% to 20% of their rental income. Last year, this policy was piloted in 3 provinces: Hebei, Hunan, and Yunnan. Personal rental properties are subject to 10% income tax rate, while non-residential properties are subject to a 20% income tax rate. There have been reports that since the implementation of the landlord tax in pilot areas, the profits of speculative investors in those regions have been severely affected. According to survey data released by the People's Bank of China, urban households in China own an average of 1.5 properties, with over 30% of urban households owning 2 properties or more, and over 10% of households owning 3 properties or more. However, this is just an average, and similar to China's wealth distribution, a significant number of properties are concentrated in the hands of a small number of wealthy individuals. For those who own multiple properties, renting to repay loans has become a primary source of income. Now, many people are concerned that the landlord tax will be implemented nationwide, which has become one of the factors driving them to sell their excess properties. The difficulties in selling properties, heavy losses, cash flow problems, and concerns about the future uncertainties have intertwined, causing more and more homeowners to feel anxious and uneasy. Considering these factors, many professionals in the industry believe that China's real estate market will face a wave of property sales. The signs are already evident from the significant increase in the number of second-hand housing listings. Once the selling wave begins, a subsequent price reduction trend is inevitable. Furthermore, when problems arise in second-hand housing market, it will inevitably impact the sales of new properties. This also leads to continuous price reductions for new properties. The Kunshan property developers mentioned earlier, who were penalized for price reductions, serve as an example of this situation. During the May Day holiday period, the property prices in Shenzhen, ranging from affordable housing to luxury residences, were heavily discounted, with special offers available throughout the city. Donghai International Apartments had the most significant discount during this period. As Shenzhen's first international luxury residence, Donghai International Apartments attracted a lot of attention from investors when it opened in 2013. The top-floor duplex luxury apartments were initially priced at 290,000 yuan per square meter, with the total price reaching 250 million yuan. At that time, property prices in Shenzhen were only around 20,000 yuan per square meter. However, the sales of Donghai International Apartments have been sluggish since then. Over a span of 7 years from its opening until 2020, only 20% of the 954 units were sold. During the May Day holiday, 5 special-priced units were released, with sizes ranging from 193 to 425 square meters. The discounted total prices ranged from 18.88 million to 71.88 million yuan, with discounts varying from 5.34 million to 10.12 million yuan. The largest price reduction was for a large flat apartment of approximately 425 square meters, originally priced at 82 million yuan, but now discounted to 71.88 million yuan. In addition to luxury residences, there were several other projects in Shenzhen offering fixed-price properties or discounts, demonstrating their sincerity to attract buyers. However, developers who sell new properties at reduced prices may face penalties from the government and dissatisfaction from existing homeowners. Recently, there have been homeowners in Shenzhen demanding refunds due to the price reductions in the market. From the current indicators, it appears that after a brief recovery period of 2 to 3 months, the suppressed housing demand in China has been alleviated, but is now declining once again. With the potential arrival of a wave of property sales in the second-hand housing market, the collapse of the real estate market may be imminent.